All right, it is 6 o'clock, and I want to welcome you all to our webinar tonight, The Truth About Reading, the Eyes and Brains. I'm Andy Johnson, one of the founders of ILEC, International Literacy Educators Coalition. I'm going to shut up in about 2 seconds, but I am excited to hear from the people I've been reading about for years. So without further ado, I will introduce to you Dr. Alan Flurkey.
All right. Can you hear me? Sound check?
Yep.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much. Okay. Um, Hi everyone, from around the world. I've got a QR code right there on my screen. The references for my talk are going to be at that QR code, so I'll show it here, and it'll show up on various slides, and I'll refer to the references throughout my presentation. I'd like to give a special thanks to our host, Dr. Andy Johnson, and the International Literacy Educators Coalition, and Dr. Rick Meyer and Dr. Bess Altberger, my longtime friends and colleagues and founders of Uniting to Save Our Schools. I'm Alan Flurkey. A little bit about me. I have taught special education and general education at the primary level, and I have worked with middle school and high school students conducting research on retrospective miscue analysis. I directed the Reading, Writing, Learning Clinic at Hofstra University, where I am tonight. And that was before taking my current position as chair of the Department of Specialized Programs in Education. So before I begin, I want to start with a question. What's the most important thing about reading? My answer, making sense, understanding what you read. There are, of course, other ways to answer the question: enjoying what you read, reading broadly, reading critically. Those are just a few answers, and there are probably several more. Some might even say sounding out. And if so, maybe I can change your mind. But for the purposes of this presentation, my answer is making sense, understanding what you read. And everything that I'm going to talk about this evening will be oriented towards that premise. The title of my talk is Reading as a Meaning-Making Process, Insights from Miscue Analysis. And I'll be giving some background on miscue analysis, some history. I'll explain a little bit about what miscues are, how miscue analysis works for those of you who may be new to miscue, and I understand that on this call we've got people with various experiences, and why it's important to know about miscue analysis. I've argued that miscue analysis is such a powerful tool that everyone should know about it. Teachers, curriculum developers, principals, school superintendents, members of your school board. What about congressional representatives, senators, and certainly parents and students themselves? And why do I say that? Because what I'm going to show you can be done by any teacher or parent with any reader. In other words, I've never known miscue analysis to fail. Fail to do what? Miscue analysis shows reader strengths and how the reading process works, and I've never known it to fail to do that. So I'll start with a little history. You may be aware that a reading miscue is not the same thing as a mistake. I'll say more about the difference in a moment. But where did that idea come from? It began the way all science, real science, begins, and that's with observation. In 1964, Ken Goodman asked, what happens when someone reads and how can it be documented? And he did something that hadn't been done before. He sat readers in front of a large reel-to-reel tape deck and gave them something to read from beginning to end, an authentic story, not something contrived for testing purposes. And he did something else. He didn't interrupt them. He just listened. And when he played back the recording and compared what he'd heard to the reader's printed text, he noticed that not only were there places where the reader said something different, he noticed that some of what the reader said preserved the meaning of the text. By the way, that's Ken and Yetta in their living room in Detroit, and I want to thank Debbie Goodman for this photo. I've had conversations with Ken, and here's what happened next. I want you to read this paragraph. Now I'm going to play the reader reading it, so I want you to follow along carefully.
Sure, baby, you must be hungry, said the woodman. I'll make some porridge for you. I'll light the fire in the fireplace, and the porridge will be ready in a few minutes.
Did you hear that? There's a subtle change in the text. The reader said, I'll light the fire in the fireplace. There it is right there. When Goodman heard the word the for he knew in an instant that the conventional view of reading was wrong. In that moment, he saw that what the reader said was based on their knowledge of grammar and was not the result of mismatching a memorized word. And I don't recall if he described it as a spark of inspiration or if it hit him like a bolt from the blue, but he knew in that moment that the view of reading as accurate word identification, a view informed by behaviorism and reading psychology, more accurately associationism, could not account for what he'd heard. It was an insight that seeded what was to become the psycholinguistic model of the reading process. And it's a model that describes reading as a process of meaning construction. And as Goodman's thinking evolved, so did the name of the model. Each part of the model's name was thoughtfully selected from, at first, a psycholinguistic model to a socio-psycholinguistic model as a nod to the influence of systemic functional linguistics and the work of Michael Halliday, to the current socio-psycholinguistic transactional model, with a nod to the influence of reader response theory and the work of Louise Rosenblatt. So back to observing. Ken Goodman named those observations, like what you heard the little girl do, oral reading miscues. And he chose that term because he wanted a term that was neutral to differentiate it from the concept of mistake or error. And he named this new approach to collecting data and theorizing about the reading process miscue analysis. Many years ago, Rick Meyer brought to my attention, and I agree, that miscue analysis is its own methodology, informed by a theory of reading as meaning construction. And miscue analysis continues to inform that theory today. There have been hundreds of studies of and grants and articles, books and book chapters about miscue analysis and what it tells us about the reading process. So now I'm going to talk about 4 things: how to do a miscue analysis, what you get from a miscue analysis, what a miscue actually is for those who are curious about it, and I'll share some audio examples. And finally, I want to share a way to think about what's called reading fluency. And I hope that this will set the stage for the 2 presentations that follow. So how do you do it? Here's a summary of how Goodman collected miscues, and it's still done basically the same way. The slide's going to be kind of busy, but I want to show you what's involved in a miscue analysis. There are 2 parts. First is the uninterrupted oral reading, followed by the retelling to check for understanding. Now, I'm going to focus on the how to collect the oral reading data and leave the how to obtain a retelling for another time, because we could spend an entire evening on that topic. So there are 4 components to collecting the uninterrupted oral reading. First, there's the reading material. Now, you can do a miscue analysis on anything that can be read, but for our purposes, I'll talk about what a researcher or a classroom teacher would do. Select something to read that is authentic, a real text for real reading, not something to be written for assessment, and something that you estimate to be within the reader's conceptual and linguistic grasp, and that the reader hasn't read before. And there are good reasons for each of these choices, and you can find out more about how to do a miscue analysis in the Reading Miscue Inventory book, which gets my vote as the best book on reading ever. You also need a copy of what the reader's reading, so you can write down the miscues, and we call that marking the miscues. And what I like to do is I like to type up a triple-spaced copy of the story. That's called a typescript, so that I have room to write the miscues. But you can always just make a photocopy of what the reader's reading. And you'll also need a pencil, not a pen, for marking the miscues. And I say a pencil because we often change our minds about what we hear when we're marking miscues. And we might want to erase and revise what we heard so that we have a faithful representation of what the reader read. And you'll need a recording device, because miscue analysis is always recorded. Well, not always, but in most cases. And I use my iPhone. There is a procedure that doesn't use a recording. It's called the reading conference procedure, or the informal procedure. And you could also read about those in the RMI book. And then finally, there are the instructions that you give to readers. Essentially 2 simple directions. You say, I'm going to ask you to read something you haven't seen before. And if you come to anything you don't know, just do what you would do if you were reading by yourself, because I can't help you. And I might be making notes. And then you say, and when you finish, I'm going to ask you to close the book and tell me everything you can remember about what you just read. That second direction cues the reader for the retelling. And that's basically it. and off you go. Here's what it sounds like.
Oh, here we go. So it has to be a book that you haven't read before. I'd like you to read this story out loud, and I'm just going to listen. I might make some notes. I have something to make notes on here. And if you would, if you come to something you don't know,
Yeah.
just do what you would do if you're all by yourself. Like if you're in your rocking chair and you go to something, then you just treat it that way. Okay? And then when you're done, I'm going to ask you to tell me what you remember. Tell me about the story.
Read the whole story?
Yep, read it.
Here?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Winnie the Witch lived in a black house in the forest.
And off she goes. I'm going to share a lot of examples from this little girl. She's a fourth grader, and she was represented to me as being a struggling reader. Okay, so what do you get from a miscue analysis? Two things related to making sense and related to each other: comprehension and comprehending. From the retelling that immediately follows the reading, you get a sense of the reader's comprehension. We all know what comprehension is. It's that residual, unique, personal understanding of what was read. So here's a definition. Comprehension is the product of what the reader brings to the reading with a sense they've made of the text after reading. I really like that definition because it references the idea that to make sense of a text, you need to bring something to the reading, some background, some experience, and you build on that as you make sense reading the text. And here's what it sounds like.
Over no matter where to sit.
Sits. Well done. What'd you think of the story?
I thought she would be like a bad witch because like everything was black. And then she was like, I guess she turned out to be a good witch because she made a cat a different color. But I mean, like it was for her so she could see, so she's not like getting hurt or anything and squishing the cat. And then she made the cat black again because she thought he was miserable and she didn't like that. But then she like turned out and she like made the house like all colorful. So the cat was happy and then she was happy.
And it goes on and on. The reader made complete sense of the story, and I think it's just a marvelous display of comprehension. Okay, so that's comprehension. Now, what about comprehending? From the oral reading, we get a pattern of miscues from which we can infer a reader's comprehending of the text. Now, that ing at the end of comprehending is meant to evoke the idea of an in-process meaning making during the reading of a text. Here's the definition. Comprehending is the concern for making meaning that a reader shows as they are reading. I'm going to come back to this idea of comprehending and show you some miscues in just a moment. But let me share some key insights, some findings from miscue analysis. Reading is first and foremost about meaning making. Readers don't read to be accurate, they read to make meaning. Reading always involves prediction. Reading always involves perception. And what that means is that sometimes readers see things that aren't there, and sometimes they don't see things that are there. And all readers do this, no matter how proficient, and this is normal and natural. See how different this is from the perspective that stems from a science of reading. Okay, so just what is an oral reading miscue and how does it differ from a mistake? Here's the classic definition. A miscue is a place where the observed response does not match the expected response, as expected by you, the listener. So by this definition, when a reader's reading, anything you hear that doesn't match what you expect to hear when you're looking at a copy of the text is a miscue, and it gets written down. And here's the difference if you haven't already guessed it. Comparatively speaking, miscues have values. Miscues have weight. Mistakes or errors don't. Here's what I mean. In general, miscues can be classified in either of two categories: high-quality miscues that preserve the meaning of a text, or miscues that result in some sort of disruption of the meaning of the text. We call those disruptive miscues for short. And I know of no other assessment that makes this distinction. Not in formal reading inventories, not even running record, and certainly not any psychoeducational standardized reading test. I had fun making that slide. Okay, so now I want you to read this paragraph in the upper left and then follow along closely as the reader reads it.
When Wilbur sat on the carpet with his eyes wide open, Winnie could see him. She could see his eyes anyway.
Did you hear that? The reader inserted the word wide and read with his eyes wide open. That's a high quality miscue because the meaning of the sentence and the text are preserved. That below in the circle is what the reader actually said. So that's the reader's text. So what if a reader was riddled? What if a reading was riddled with these kinds of high quality miscues, accompanied by a satisfactory retelling, but where some observer counted them as errors? And what if the observer made instructional decisions based on an error count without weighing the miscues? You see the problem? Okay, Goodman's original miscue taxonomy showed 117 different classifications of miscues, but for our purposes, I want to focus on 3 basic types. Omissions, where a word is left out. That was read as they make your dreams come true. Insertions, like the one we just heard, that's an insertion of the word wide. And then substitutions, where one word is said for another. This one was read as, he hated to get Marcel's white hairs on his beautiful blue shirt. And any of these miscues, omissions, insertions, substitutions, could be high quality miscues or disruptive. I'm showing high quality miscues here in these examples. And so these are the most frequently observed types, but there are a few other variations, like syntactic rearrangements, where a reader will take 2 sentences and make 1 sentence out of them, or take 1 sentence and break it into 2 sentences. And I'll show you an example of that in just a moment. And then, while technically not miscues, but of interest, are things like repetitions and pauses, and those get marked down too. Okay, I want to share a few thoughts about how my terminology in describing miscues has evolved. That's a high quality miscue. And when I judge a miscue to be a high quality, I also think of it now as a schema-driven miscue. A schema-driven miscue occurs when a reader's expectations are so strong that their perceptions override the printed text. I like the term schema-driven because it so firmly emphasizes the role of prediction and perception in the process of making sense of a text. Now, if you want to hear a real whopper of a schema-driven miscue, look at this text here on the upper left, and I'm going to play what happens in the middle sentences, sentences 3 and 4, or sentence 3. She picked up her magic wand. Listen to what the reader does.
So she picked up her magic wand and waved it in the air. Abracadabra.
Wow, that's a schema-driven structure. That's what it looks like with the miscue markings, and down below is what she actually said. Remember, a schema-driven miscue occurs when a reader's expectations are so strong their perceptions override the printed text. This is a display of linguistic strength that this so-called struggling reader did when she was doing a miscue analysis. And these examples are just I find them just so fascinating. Okay, what about the other kind of miscue? Disruptive miscues. When there's a disruptive miscue that's followed by a self-correction, or even when there's an attempt at producing the expected response, I refer to that as a schema-forming miscue. Here in this example, the reader appears to predict the sentence, Wilbur was black no longer. That's what I think the reader was going to read. But then she seems to notice that the article is needed, so she stops and rereads and self-corrects. That's a schema-forming miscue. It's one where a reader makes a prediction and then rethinks and revises or corrects before continuing on. So here's what it sounds like.
Wilbur was black. Wilbur was a black cat no longer. He was bright green.
Have you ever heard a reader self-correct? That's generally what's happening. When I hear a reader self-correct, I ask myself in that moment, what could they have been predicting? And then what caused the revision? In this case, the reader noticed that the grammar was not what she was expecting, so she goes back and takes another look before correcting and moving on. So to summarize, a schema-driven miscue can also be thought of as a prediction not requiring revision. And a schema-forming miscue can be thought of as a prediction that does require revision in order for the sentence to be acceptable. I use this terminology to stress that reading is a process, I'll say it again, driven by prediction, and that the expected response is produced by the same process as the prediction of a miscue. In other words, reading accurately or saying the word right is a product of the same process that produces miscues. And I should tell you that I owe this shift in terminology to my reading of To Err is Human by Yetta and Ken Goodman, which I think it gets my vote as the best book chapter on reading ever written. And I encourage you to seek it and and give it a look. Okay, so what does all this mean about the reading process? Stephen L. Strauss is a colleague, and he has both a PhD in linguistics and an MD in neurology. And as my colleague Deborah Goodman likes to say, Steve is the only person who can give a second opinion on both an RMI and an MRI. So Steve has said that his favorite part of the brain is the thalamus. Here's why. The thalamus is an egg-shaped structure in the middle of your brain, and it works like a relay station for all the incoming motor and sensory information, hearing and taste and sight and touch, going from your body to your brain. And there are bundles of fibers that send signals from the thalamus to the brain, to the cortex, the gray matter. And there's another set of fibers sending signals in the opposite direction, from the cortex back to the thalamus. Until recently, it was thought that the number of fibers running from the brain's cortex to the thalamus was about the same as the number of fibers going from the thalamus to the cortex. That would mean that the brain uses feedback. It takes incoming information and checks it. Incoming and check continuously. But Steve learned, and this illustration shows, that there are actually 10 times more cortical fibers going from the cortex, from the gray matter, to the thalamus than the other way around. That means that the brain uses feed forward. It makes continual predictions and checks its predictions. So what does that mean for reading? Well, from a biological perspective, reading is about continual prediction all the way down. Just like just about every other aspect of our conscious lives. When you're driving, when you're listening, when you're moving about in the world, it's prediction all the way down. Now, I haven't talked about instruction, but here's one immediate implication for teachers. Other than when a reader asks an honest question that immediately that deserves an honest answer, other than that, if you immediately correct a reader, you deprive them of the chance to confirm their own predictions. And that has the effect of short-circuiting the process that allows them to make meaning for themselves. So that, for me, is an implication that comes from this notion about reading as continual prediction and what the brain does well. So I want to conclude with an implication that comes from miscue analysis as it relates to what's popularly called oral reading fluency. Now, we all have an idea of what reading fluency is. For most, it's when reading aloud sounds good, like when a reader has control of the text. To some, it might sound like they're reading accurately and effortlessly. And I say that in scare quotes. We, as teachers, are generally pretty good at reading aloud. Do you know that we generally read stories aloud at a rate in the neighborhood of about 180 words per minute? That's averaged over an entire story. It's about the rate at which I'm talking now. But from a science of reading perspective, oral reading fluency is a component of automaticity, also known as skilled reading, where in order for a reader to have the intentional resources, it's thought, to comprehend a text, they need to display rapid and accurate word identification. But is that true? Here's what miscue data shows. Listen to this reader she had complete understanding of the text. You already heard part of the retelling, and she's going to read these 4 sentences, and I want you to follow along.
Now when Wilbur slept on a chair, when he could see him. When Wilbur slept on the floor, when he could see him. When she could see him, and when she could see him, when he slept on the bed. But Wilbur was not allowed to sleep on the bed. So when he put him outside on the green grass.
So some parts sound kind of fluid, but the middle part, especially that third sentence doesn't sound fluent at all, right? You can hear the reader speeding up and slowing down, right? So can that be captured? Well, there's a way to do that. Here are the reading rates for each of those 4 sentences. Look at the variability in the reading rate from 117 to 208 to 63, where we heard her do a lot of revising, to that last sentence that's also coincidentally 177 words per minute. So why is that happening? Here's why. See how sentence number 3 is a schema-forming structure? That's where she's having to do a lot of revising. And then sentence 4, immediately following, is a schema-driven structure. look at 3 and 4. Look at especially 4, where she omits the period after the first outside and then omits the second outside and says in for on and green grass. So the sentence number 3 is an example of a schema forming structure. All told, it's 63 words per minute. But the following schema-driven structure is 177 words per minute. So when he put him outside on the green grass. And Yetta Goodman helped me think about this. So is the reading rate to 177 in spite of the miscues or because of the miscues? All right. So this kind of analysis can be done for an entire reading. There are profiles that I'm going to show you of 3 fourth-grade readers who completely understood the story, The Sweetest Fig by Chris Van Allsburg. And by calculating the reading rate of each sentence in the story and displaying them side by side from first to last, you get this classic up and down, ebb and flow display of reading rate. The data shows that rate is not a constant across sentences. Chris was described as variously as a non-reader and as the worst reader in the school. How's that for a label? Harriet was also described as a struggling reader. Again, note the classic ebb and flow of the reading rate. But what about a highly proficient reader? Someone who's clearly a skilled reader and could be said to possess rapid and accurate word recognition capability. What do you think their profile is going to look like? Same thing. Now I want to call attention to the sentences in each of those that were read at the highest rates, the tallest sentences. It's not that there were no miscues in those sentences. Rather, it's in these sentences where schema-driven miscues are likely to be found. And correspondingly, what about the lowest rated sentences? The ones that were read most slowly. It's in those sentences that the production of schema-forming structures are likely to be sound. And those are revisions that follow predictions that take more time. So here's my takeaway. Oral reading fluency is a flawed metaphor that conjures up the idea of water flowing through a smooth pipe. And instead, what really appears to be happening, metaphorically, is more like water flowing over a riverbed, where the rate of flow speeds up and slows down, depending on what the reader's encountering in the text and the meaning they're making at any given point in time. So the 3 graphs that I showed you were to scale, but if they were to scale, here's what it would look like. I lined up all 3 graphs so the line for 100 words per minute were the same height, and it would look like this. So see how Rhonda's lowest rated sentences are generally higher than Chris's highest rated sentences? Why is that? It's because Rhonda is an efficient reader in comparison to Chris and Harriet. Rhonda is using the least number of print cues necessary to make meaning as she reads, and she's highly flexible in the reading strategies, in using the strategies of sampling, predicting, and confirming. And why is that? She's had a lot of experience reading texts, different kinds of texts, and she's confident. And confidence and experience plays a key role. So here are some implications that I think follow from what I've shown. Instead of training readers to read fluently, we should be providing experiences that enable readers to read more efficiently for their own purposes. That means broad experiences reading of a wide variety of texts that they're interested in. I think we should stop extensive and intensive systematic instruction aimed at rapid and automatic word identification. I think we should stop round-robin reading. This is still happening in high school, by the way, at least on Long Island. I don't know about where your region is. And it shouldn't be happening in any school. And I think we should stop correcting readers at the point of utterance. So I want to give Yetta Goodman the second to last word. Children don't correct themselves because we tell them they're wrong. They correct themselves because they're refining their hypotheses about what makes sense. And the last thing I want to say is I get news alerts from my Google account whenever any media outlet publishes an article or news report with the keywords science of reading or evidence-based. And I've got a few other keywords like those. And I read the news reports and I evaluate them. And here's what I think. I think evidence can be contested. And I think what counts as evidence can be contested. I think science can be contested. And what counts as science can be contested. And I'll argue that in this presentation, that miscue analysis is science and it's based on evidence. And I want to stop there. I want to thank you for listening. I'm going to turn this over to Peter Duckett. Peter, take it away.
So, can we go up to the top slide? All right. I'm going to be sharing some information regarding beginning readers and from an eye movement miscue analysis study that I did involving 6-year-olds. All of the students that were involved in this study were 6-year-olds. Just a little bit of information that some of you may or may not be aware of. This was developed in about 1999, 2000 by Eric Paulson at the University of Arizona. It's a methodology in which we're combining looking at students or readers' eye movements and in conjunction with miscue analysis. And one of the things that you maybe are not aware of is that when readers read, their eyes move, and those movements are directed by the brain. It's not that the eye is making the decision, it's the brain that is directing the eye where to look. And when the eye is making those movements of jumping from place to place, those are called saccades. And when they're actually stopped and looking or sampling graphic information, that's what's referred to as a fixation. Okay, so Andy, could you shift to the next slide, please? So when I was doing my study, I had one major guiding question, which is very similar to what Ken Goodman had when he was developing miscue analysis. And I was curious to try to find out, what do beginning readers do? Within the professional community at that time, there was a lot of discussion, as there is now, about what beginning readers should do. And there was an awful lot of, there were a lot of mandates saying what teachers should be doing in relation to teaching beginning readers. And it was based on simply what people thought readers should do. But it wasn't necessarily asking the question of what do beginning readers actually do. So that was my guiding question. Some of the things that I'm going to be sharing here are findings that may be surprising, but, and some people may look at them and say, oh, that's a beginning reader. But what you need to know is that most of the findings that I'm about to share with you have been substantiated for adult readers as well. All of the participants in my study were 6-year-olds at the time that they participated in my study. So next slide, please. So here are some things to keep in mind. The brain is in control. The brain is what controls the eyes and the voice. The brain decides. It's not the eye and it's not the tongue. And the brain fills in or provides what it predicts is missing. For example, in an area of your eye, there is a portion of the internal part of your eye that does not actually receive visual information, but the brain fills it in. And that's the scotoma region. So again, it's linked back to what Alan was just talking about in terms of schema forming and schema driven miscues. So let's look at the next slide. So I'm hopeful that this is going to work. This is a video. I'm hopeful that you can actually open and it will play of Javier reading a text. I'm not sure if it's going to open for you. Can you get it to open and play? Maybe not. Okay, let's just go to the next slide. All right, so here is the first item. Readers do not fixate or visually sample every word when they're reading, nor every letter. So, okay. So what you see here on the screen is an image that is showing you the locations of the fixation points of one of my readers when they were reading, and you can see that they're not fixating every single word, nor are they fixating every single letter. This has been a long-standing finding in eye movement research, and it's been around for well over 100 and probably about 100 and almost 175 years, I believe. So this is well known, and yet there are individuals these days that are saying that every single readers do sample every single letter or every single word, or the expectation is that readers will do that. Adult readers do not do that either. Okay, next slide. This is probably one of the more surprising things that people encounter when they start doing eye movement research, and that readers do not always move serially from one word to the next, from left to right. They often go forwards, backwards, and they even go up and down between lines. In some instances, they're actually sampling things from the next line down, or they move back and forth. Again, it's based on the brain's need to move to where it thinks it's going to find the graphic information that will be useful in constructing meaning from the text. So here's a sample where you can see, it seems a little small on my screen, but you can see the fixation points are numbered. And this reader moves from 501 to 502 to 503 to 504 and 505. And I'm not sure exactly, I can't even see because it's small for me. But again, that's a sample from that page. The reader did have other fixations, but that's showing you that readers do not always move serially from word to word. Okay, next slide, please. With the software that I was using at the time I was doing my study, it was possible to examine the fixation durations, and readers' fixation durations vary. What is interesting here is you can see that they're represented by different size dots, showing the duration variation. And you'll see that on the word people, the fixation duration is much larger than back on the word feeding. Again, there's variation in terms of how long a reader is looking at any portion of a text. Okay, next, please. Readers' fixations are not always in the center of words, horizontally or vertically. Now, why do you think that might be? It might be because, again, the reader is using what they already know and also making predictions about what is coming next. So you'll see that they are sampling, the brain is directing the eye to sample from the regions that it perceives as being or predicts as being the location where the most valuable information will be available in the process of constructing meaning. Okay, next slide. Readers engage in regressive eye movements. This means that the eye movements go backward in the text. Again, this is the same sample that you saw in a previous slide. This is something that took me a while to actually realize, and that is that some people will look at the concept of a regression, a visual regression, as being, going back and fixing, so it was a mistake. It was realizing I need to fix something. What's interesting is in a lot of cases, it is a point of self-correction. But what is also of value to consider is regressions are cognitive progressions. It means that when a reader realizes I need to go back and fix something, or I need to self-correct, it's because they have made a cognitive progression to realize that this is not working, this is not making sense, therefore I need to do something to make it make sense. So again, it's a cognitive progression. What I also found interesting and what Alan was just referencing is that basically all of the words that readers produce, or all the language that they produce when they're reading, are based on prediction. Again, I will say that all fixations, progressive or regressive, are cognitive progressions. Regressions, again, frequently occur prior to oral repetitions or self-corrections. So that's the last sentence in relation to this slide. And again, I want to emphasize that readers basically are engaged in a cognitive process of building meaning as they are in the act of reading, whether it's looking at the data from the voice or from the eyes. Okay, readers exhibit a thing that's called the eye-voice span as they read. This means that the eyes are out ahead of the voice. Generally, the eyes are out ahead of the voice in terms of where they're sampling information, and that varies. In a lot of ways, that links to what Alan was also referencing in relation to words per minute and in the samples that he just shared. So while I find it interesting that a lot of educators find it very easy to understand that readers, they'll say reading fluency varies from text to text, and they will acknowledge the fact that, okay, maybe on this text, Johnny knew a lot about whales, but on this text about spiders, he didn't know a lot, so his reading fluency was less strong. What they fail to recognize is that within a text, readers' eye voice span also is highly variable. And as Alan said, it has to do with the idea of flow or fluency along the lines of what he was saying in relation to rather than water through a pipe, it's water along a riverbed. This is also another thing that's kind of interest, is that readers produce words orally that they do not fixate. What I found most interesting with my readers who were 6-year-olds is that in 100% of the cases that they did not fixate a particular word, they produced it orally. This tells me that they knew and they were able to predict with 100% accuracy that the word was going to be there. Therefore, the brain said it would be a redundant and unnecessary use of energy to actually fixate the word because I know it's going to be there. So they don't necessarily fixate every word. This is also true for adult readers. Adult readers do not fixate every word as they read. In fact, there are studies where readers fixate somewhere in the neighborhood of anywhere from about 75% of the words down to maybe even 63% of the words on the page. Readers' fixations vary on the same word in different contexts. With my readers, I found that I had readers who would look for varying durations at the same word in different contexts. So for me, this again implies that context does matter. It's not that the student would, or the reader would not be able to actually read the word in isolation. It's the context basically dictated the duration of the fixation in relation to the overall text in terms of where it appeared in the text. Okay, next item is readers fixate content words more frequently than function words. So content words are words that are things like nouns and verbs, which basically are the major meaning carriers in the text. So readers know that the bulk of meaning is there. And in a lot of cases, what I find interesting is that the function words often are not fixated because the reader, particularly after they are relatively far into the text, have a sense of the relationships among the nouns, verbs, etc., and what's going on. So therefore, they can predict with high fidelity what the function words are, or even substitute, as Alan was referencing, they may substitute function words that basically are non-disruptive to the meaning. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is pretty much where I'm about to end, and that is when readers engage in oral pauses, their brains are actively directing their eyes where, when, and how long to sample. A lot of times in instructional programs or within classrooms, teachers have been coached to tell students the next word, or obviously correct them as quickly as possible. Whereas when readers' voices are paused, their brains are actually actively directing their eyes to engage in additional sampling. And as Alan referenced, in many cases, if a teacher interrupts the student, they are basically disrupting the students' opportunities to employ the strategies that they have, and possibly even develop new strategies to deal with complexities that the text might offer them. In some instances, the oral pauses are involved with the student actually thinking about what the graphic information that's available to them, how that might be used or useful in actually constructing meaning. And when we disrupt that, we basically have robbed the reader of their own opportunity to use the graphic information that they have sampled in order to actually construct a text or construct meaning. So that is the end of my section, and I'm going to hand it to Perpy.
Thank you, Peter. I forgot to unmute myself. So let me go ahead, and I think Andy said I can go ahead and share my screen. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Share sound. Oops, not letting me share my sound. Let me go see that. Andy, I need to be sharing my sound because I have videos to share.
Okay.
And it's not letting me share the sound, not letting me click on that share sound button. I'll go ahead and see how that might look like. So if I go and present my sounds, so let me go and get my share going on here. Let's see. Oh, oops, I'm looking, I can't see. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna go and share my slide. Okay, so hello everyone. So I'm Perpy Liwang from Towson University. I'm so glad that Alan and Peter have already explained a lot of the key aspects or terminologies that I want to share with everybody today. My presentation is on examining reader strategies using eye movement miscue analysis. So I'm going to go ahead with this one. There are three things that I wanted to share in this presentation. First is to make sure that participants, all of you, will learn a little bit about eye movement, adding to what has already been shared. I want everybody also, for all of us, to consider reader strategies when we're reading. And lastly, to consider what reading as a meaning-making process looks like using eye movement miscue analysis, or EMA. So let's get started with what is eye movement miscue analysis. And this is really nice to go after Peter because he has already explained a lot of the things that I wanted to share. But I do want to go and just focus on some key highlights and things to revisit for you to better understand the data that I'll be sharing. I wanted to showcase this book image that we have. It's a book that was been recently published by my colleagues and I. And I want to just share the setup. So in this book image, and I'm pointing on the screen, the reader who's in front of a computer. This is how we collect the eye movement data. And in fact, this instrument here is an eye tracking machine. The other one is the other image in this book is actually a mobile eye, and this is how we actually also collect it. So we have a reader reading, and then the mobile eye is like an eyeglass, and then we ask the reader following miscue procedures that Alan already explained. We ask the reader to read using this process. So we all know what miscue analysis as Emma is, as Peter already shared earlier. In fact, this research method, the combination of eye movement and miscue, has been around for the past 20 plus years. If we are going to trace, and Peter actually shared that, it stems from the work, from the dissertation work. And I think among those dissertation, I think Peter, your dissertation among those that started us in this path of the eye movement miscue analysis, as well, University of Arizona. And it involves, again, examining those fixations and produced by readers at the same time as their oral reading of an authentic text. The second one that I want to share are the strategies that readers use when they read for meaning. And we already had some of those insights and key description from Alan's presentation. But I always want to share, this is one of my favorite figures from the Goodman-Watson-Burke reading miscue inventory text, because it allows us to see the strategies that readers use when they are reading. I think one of the caution that we need to think about is that although the strategies here are listed like initiating, sampling, selecting, in this way, they're not actually linear. The strategies here are interrelated, and readers actually could double back or even move forward whenever they're engaged in these strategies. Again, although I'm listing them here, initiating, sampling, selecting, predicting, inferring, it doesn't mean that they are linear. Strategies also include confirming, disconfirming, self-correcting, integrating, and then terminating. The reason I want to share this so that when we look at the Emma videos that I will be sharing with you, you can see how how readers actually utilize all of these strategies as they are reading, because these are universal reading strategies. What we would call, Goodman-Watson-Burke actually call this strategies as, a problem-solving operations to make sense when you're reading. So I'm going to go ahead and see, so what does reading as a meaning-making process look like using Emma? We already saw some initial insights from Peter's presentation of 6-year-olds reading and their data. And from that, again, the emphasis that Peter shared, and I want to re-emphasize that as well, that the brain is the one that directs the eyes where to look at and what to look for as readers seek the most useful and important information. So what I'm going to, before I share a video, let me just give a quick note on the reader. So I'm going to go share with you a high school reader. She's a 9th grader. She read aloud a news article from newsla.com, and did a retelling immediately after the oral reading. Part of that Emma process. The Emma data that I'm going to share was collected using Real Eye, which is a webcam eye tracking software. So let me go and share with you. And these are just excerpts. So when the reader read, they read the entire article. But what I want to share with everybody today is just a short clip to showcase some of the key things that I want you to notice when the reader is reading. So when I play the clip, take a note on where the yellow circles indicate where the readers are looking at. So try to see if you can follow that yellow circle when the reader is reading. So let me see. I hope the video, the audio works. So Andy, let me know if you're able to hear the audio for this one. Let me go move this. Oops, sorry.
NASA unveils simulation habitat.
Yes.
Humans will prepare for Mars. By Charles Schroeder, the Guardian, adapted from the Nucella staff.
All right. Okay, so thanks, Andy, for so everybody heard that piece. So when I showed that, I hope you were able to notice that these are the strategies that the reader actually used. She sampled the text and she selected what to look at. Again, we've seen that readers do not always fixate serially, word by word, from left to right. And we've seen that from the earlier data of 6-year-olds. The other one is that readers are actually searching for information. Okay, so let me go ahead and move on to the next slide. So by predicting and inferring based upon background knowledge and experiences, we saw just from that first clip that proficient readers actually use written text selectively. The second one that I want to go and share with you with regards to what meaning construction looks like when we have Emma data is that readers also use multiple sources when they're reading that goes beyond using phonemic awareness and phonics. So let me introduce you to a clip again of a second grader, an elementary reader. Again, the data that I'm going to go show you is an excerpt of complete text, but the data was collected using an ASL 504 eye tracker. So for this, it's not the yellow fixation or that you're going to go look at, not a yellow circle, but instead you're going to go try and notice what this black square, which is actually where the eyes are looking at, goes to when I play this video. So let's see. Move my cursor here. Play this.
No, and finding seniors.
All right. So I hope you heard that audio as well. And here, what we want to say again, what was the reader doing when he was reading this text? We saw that here, when the reader was constructing meaning, he used the pictures. He confirmed the information that he saw, again, starting from the text to the image and back to the text. And again, going beyond just the phonemic awareness or phonics. So let me go play that again and see if you can notice that.
No, and finding seniors.
All right. So again, the strategies the reader used for constructing meaning. So let me go and move on to another reader. So this reader is a third grader, and he read The Line Down the Middle, which is a narrative fiction. The original text that I'm going to go share with you is from Line Down the Middle, and it reads, "Turn off the light, will you?" And Daniel's produced text is turns out to be "Turn off the light, will you?" So what does that look like? And here is an example of the fixations that Daniel produced, and it shows his monitoring strategies earlier on from the MISCU presentation and the Emma presentation. We saw examples of what these symbols actually denote. The circles, fixations, where you have to pause to be able to have information. And the lines are actually the saccades, like Peter also mentioned. It is, denotes the numbers denote sequence, and the lines are the ones that connect one fixation to the other. Miscues are also evident here. Daniel corrected and omitted miscue. So what does this mean? Again, here we see the eye pattern. So we're now combining the eye and the miscue in this image above from figure 4.2, where the reader initially omitted the word will and immediately regressed and self-corrected the omission. So this miscues and eye movements showed that Daniel predicted, inferred, disconfirmed, and self-corrected. So these are all manifestations of his meaning making. And lastly, when we look at how meaning making looks like in using in reading using eye movement, we know that reading is an active process. It is dynamic as readers integrate what they know with what they are reading. So let's see how this actually applies with a college student. So we ask again a college student to read a folktale, The Man Who Kept House, and I just want to share with you just again an excerpt. They read entire text following miscue procedures, retelling it while their eyes were being tracked. But in sentence 2 of The Man Who Kept House, it should read, the reader read it as you can see on the screen. One evening when he came home from work, he said to his wife, "What do you do while I am out, while I am away cutting wood?" So, and again, in miscue, it just reminded me of what Alan said, the idea of schema driven. You would always say, "While I am out," as opposed to "while I am away." So here is also a social linguistic constructed process, because the reader brings his own background and experience in the text itself. So let's go ahead and see how readers confirm, disconfirm, and self-correct. So from this college student, I'm going to go play again a quick snippet. Now, when we're looking at this data, this is very different from the first 2 videos that we have seen, because this is an analyzed video. It shows the fixations that were already processed using a Results Plus software. So same thing, the variability, how long they looked at each of those areas, you can see from represented in the various sizes of the circles. So I'm going to go ahead and play it. Let me go see if I can move this one.
One evening, when he came home from work, he said to his wife, "What do you do all day while I'm away cutting wood?"
Okay, and you heard that "while I am out," that when he said "while I am out." So from this, let's see. What strategies? So reader strategies when they're constructing meaning, confirming and disconfirming by rereading, repeating, reading ahead, correcting to also show that the college students actually monitoring their reading. Although we know that this is just early in the text, this is just the beginning of the text, we already see how she was monitoring herself and correcting. So let me go play this again so we can see that correction that she did for that second sentence.
One evening, when he came home from work, he said to his wife, "What do you do all day while I'm away cutting wood?"
And there. So again, these are just examples of what readers do when we have evidence. If we are able to see where their eyes are looking at and add our knowledge of what they're saying, using our information from miscue analysis, we will have a broader understanding of what readers do and how they apply their strategies when they're making meaning of their reading. So as a summary and a reflection of what we've seen, let me go back to what I originally shared. So what did we learn about reading as a meaning-making process using Emma? First is that the brain really directs the eyes where to look at and what to look for as readers seek the most useful and important information. Second, that readers use multiple sources when reading that goes beyond using phonemic awareness and phonics. Also, that reading is an active meaning-making process. It's a dynamic process of readers integrate what they know with what they are reading. So again, that social cultural context that readers bring in the light of their reading. So if you want to read more about eye movement miscue analysis research, we do have a website that lists the research that we have done so far for the past 20 years. So you can go to emmaforum.org and explore that website. There are a lot of references that I used other than the miscue inventory, Peter Fries, Ken Goodman, Peter Fries, and Strauss reading the grand illusion. We saw those earlier shared with Alan and Peter's presentation. Thank you so much. This ends my presentation. Andy, I'll give it back to you.
All right, very good. We will take questions now, and you can either type them in the question box, or you can put them in the chat. I'm trying to unclick and talk at the same time. So if you have questions to ask our guests, you can go ahead and put them in the question thing at the bottom, or you can put them in the chat box. So I'm not seeing any questions here. Okay, here is a question. How does eye movement research go along with Sederberg's? Someone want to handle that one? Alan or Peter or Perpy?
I can't see the question if I scroll down.
Okay. The question was, how does your eye movement research go along with Sederberg's?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I know the. I'm not sure I know the reference. Are we talking about Mark Seidenberg?
I guess so.
Yeah. So, see that's really a really interesting question because the two research traditions are looking at different things. And so they're going to draw different conclusions because they look at different phenomenon and look at different tools. Mark Seidenberg is a reading psychologist, and so as from what I know about his work, he looks very closely at how readers are dealing with visual input at the word level, whereas miscue analysis really starts at the whole text level and looks at how readers are making sense of an entire text. So there really isn't a lot of overlap in what the two traditions are addressing, and so there's not a lot of conversation back and forth for that reason. But you know what? If you're interested in understanding why things are the way they are, there's a great book chapter by Frank Smith in Joining the Literacy Club. It's several years old now, but it's called How Education Backed the Wrong Horse, and I just love that chapter because Frank Smith talks about the disconnect between literacy and say reading psychology, and it goes a long way for explaining why the two fields really aren't in conversation with each other. So I don't know if that's a very satisfying explanation, but that's really how I kind of piece that together.
It is. We got a lot of questions coming in here. Research including bilingual, multilingual learners in their home language and Emma. Can anyone comment on that?
Yeah, I think I could. I'm sorry, I was going to go. Peter, do you want to go?
No, I just was asking him to repeat the question.
Oh, I was looking at the question, the Q&A box there, but I think this reminds me of there is research on that includes multilingual learners, and I remember Freeman and Ibis work. Freeman studying bilingual learners and their eye tracking.
Some of my readers were bilingual, as a matter of fact. So, yeah. I mean, I was asking them to read in English, but some of my readers were bilingual. Yes, and I did not ask them to read in their other languages. I had several English and Spanish speakers, and I had a trilingual English, Spanish, and Autumn reader.
I
Well,
also, yeah,
Right.
I was also going to go add that I also examined, I have a study that looked at readers, adult readers reading in Tagalog and English. And then I think we always go back to the universality of the reading process. We all go through the same strategy. I just want to add that one.
What happens when an adult reader deals with pictures in print? Do they float between graphics and print as the beginning reader did? Many times SOR is requesting that the pictures are removed to prevent the eyes from going to the picture. How would you answer that?
Well, the premise that underpins that is that reading is about word identification, and so the idea is to kind of restrict the reader from getting additional information so that they are able to focus solely on the print cues. And the point of that, of course, is to promote reading accurately and automatically. But as we've talked about tonight, that's really not the heart of the reading process. So I would argue that that actually works against the purposes that we're aiming for, which is to have readers read for meaning. And another thing connected with that, and I think Perpy and Peter may be able to speak to this more eloquently than I can. But when it comes to pictures in print, there's this thinking that readers are looking at print to get information. But I think Perpy and Peter's work shows us that readers, generally don't dwell on pictures as much as we think they do. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
kind of a fallacy that underpins that.
In my study, readers spent significantly more time in print than they did in pictures. But the other thing I should also mention is that there've been a variety of research studies examining eye movement and images or works of art. And basically what is of interest there is that, again, readers of pictures sample from areas of greatest complexity where they're going to get the greatest amount of information. So for example, if they were looking at a map, if there's a coastline on the map that is basically a straight line, they don't spend a lot of time on that. They spend a lot of time on all the little ins and outs of the peninsulas or whatever in the inlets, because that's going to provide them with the greatest amount of information that will be useful, probably. I mean, they can summarize what they need to know in relation to the straight coastline pretty darn quickly.
Here's two questions, kind of the same thing. Science of reading insist that readers look at every letter. How would you respond to the science of readers reading people?
Perpy, take it away.
Well, we have
Insist.
seen, I was going to go say that it's really very difficult to read letter by letter, as we have seen from our Emma data there. And oftentimes, unless it's the only one that you're looking at, if the only one that's projected in front of you, then perhaps you're going to go look. But it's still very difficult to look at letter by letter.
Well, eye movement research has been around, as I said, for like almost 175 years. And it's not, I mean, that has been disproven ages ago. So it's like, if they're saying that, it's an inaccuracy, period.
Well, and Jim, that's a really good question, because a lot of people, I think, continue to ask that question, Jim Burnett. And the way that I would answer that is that a lot of it depends on how you're structuring your research and what it is that you're looking at and what you're calling reading. So when science of reading proponents say that readers are looking at every single letter, what they're calling reading is not what we've talked about tonight. What we've talked about is what happens when readers are constructing meaning from a whole, complete, authentic text. And science of reading researchers that are using eye tracking are often not looking, as a matter of fact, I can't think of any examples where the reading of a whole text is really under study. Because they're doing experimental studies, they're looking at very small samples of texts, perhaps one sentence long or even shorter, and devising experiments to look at what readers are doing. And so when you have a participant responding to a really small snippet of text, and I wouldn't call it, I wouldn't call it language, because it's not language in the way that I think we on this call are thinking about language, which is a coherent, complete text. You get kind of a different kind of set of responses that the reader does, and so that's why that conclusion is drawn among science of reading researchers. And then there's an inference from that very small snippet of input to generalize that must be how readers deal when they're reading larger bodies of text. But that's not what's seen when eye movement researchers who use miscue study the reading process, because they're looking at whole texts, which enable readers to think as they read, to sample as they read, and show all the kinds of evidences that Peter and Perpetua have shown. So it's again, it's a disconnection that stems from different research traditions that aren't in alignment.
And I also
I don't know how you broker that. That's except to have the conversation. Keep the conversation going.
Can I also mention that sometimes you need to look very carefully at what the languages that people are using who are saying that, because they will say readers process every letter. Well, what does that mean? And I would ask that question. What does the word process mean there? Does it mean that that their eyes fixate and the brain samples through the eye? Or is it that, because they're saying a complete word that they're considering that as having processed every letter? That's one of the things that I'm constantly vigilant of when I'm reading things that have been published. What's the language they're using and the terminology they're using? Because sometimes I think it veils, something that needs to be kind of unpacked.
Here's an interesting question. What still needs to be studied with eye tracking and reading? What questions still need to be answered?
I think, eye tracking readers reading whole text in different languages has great appeal to me and is fascinating. I think that there are studies that can be devised that look at predictions that readers are making. One of the places that I think is particularly fruitful is to look at eye tracking data and combine that with information connected with corpus linguistics, which are large bodies of natural language. And one of the things that I'm interested in is looking at what happens when readers are predicting text, and the sampling, eye movement sampling, gets ahead of the voice when readers are reading, and when readers make miscues and believe they see a word that's not there. What is the frequency of those words existing in natural language? Peter Fries was working on this question shortly before he passed away last year, and I think these are the kinds of questions that are connected with language that really hold appeal for me. So really there are a lot of questions still to answer.
I think also that some people who are listening may be interested in some of the work of Jack D'Amico, who has done eye movement studies and eye movement miscue analysis studies with students readers that would represent special populations. And I think that probably would be of interest to people. I think, as Alan said, that there's plenty to be garnered from looking at readers in different languages, different scripts, different writing systems. That there are studies that have been done. Again, some of it, as Alan referenced earlier, is dependent also on the theoretical framework or the community from which the eye movement researcher is operating, because in a lot of ways that also kind of in some ways defines the boundaries of what it is they're looking at and how they're going to look at it. The filters that whatever data they collect will be passed through.
Someone asked about reading miscue analysis. Is it hard to do well in a classroom?
Actually, it's not hard to do well in a classroom. Once you grasp the basic principles, and I'm thinking about the students that I work with at the graduate level and the undergraduate level that I teach miscue analysis to. Once you develop what Yetta Goodman calls a miscue ear, you really can't turn it off. You start listening to readers and the predictions that they're making and the miscues that they're making in the moment, and determining whether or not the miscue is high quality or disruptive, schema driven or schema forming. So once you grasp the basic principles, it's something that happens all the time, and teachers find themselves not having to do a full-blown miscue analysis, but doing variations on what Deborah Goodman calls the reading conference procedure. So I refer to it once my students get the hang of miscue analysis as an occupational hazard, because they say, now I can't listen to reading any other way. And they report when they're at church or in temple and somebody's reading out loud, they should be in a mindful state. But what are they doing? They're doing miscue analysis because they have a copy of the text. So so it's not very hard. It's not very hard once you grasp the essentials. Over the shoulder miscue analysis. That's Ruth Davenport. Right. Very powerful. If I could, there's a really interesting question here. I think Tracy asked it. I can't find it. It was about, we understand that readers predict, and SOR views prediction as guessing. Remember, an SOR view would view that as guessing because the perspective that stems from that view views skills reading as automatic word recognition. And so anything that would deviate from that would be viewed as a guess. From a meaning construction perspective, guessing is just something that happens. It's part of the prediction process. And as I said in my presentation, the same process by which readers produce the right word is the process by which readers produce miscues. So again, it's a difference in perspective that stems from two different research domains. And I know I've said that before, but the two different research domains essentially boil down to that which stems from linguistics, systemic functional linguistics, and ethnography, versus what's perspectives that stem from reading psychology. And so that's where the disconnect is. At least that's what I've identified, and that's why we seem to be talking past each other. And that Frank Smith article that I mentioned earlier was a real good one for helping me get a vantage point on that. How education backed the wrong horse. I think it's from the 1990s.
Do you know of any studies combining the analysis of brain imaging with eye tracking? Would that have any value in your opinion?
I wish Steve Strauss was on this call because he could answer that.
Exactly.
And by the way, somebody put the Reading League link in the chat, so I went to that. Yeah. Again, what I think we need to do is we need to look very closely at how the research is done in these studies and begin to ask ourselves, what is the research tradition from which these studies emanate? And that'll help give us a perspective on how to evaluate the claims made by the researchers. The issue I think that Steve Strauss might have with fMRI studies of the type that I think Sally Shaywitz does, and who wrote Prude and the Squid? Marianne Wolf, I think, is that the question that's being asked is, are the readers that are for whom their brains are being scanned with fMRI, are they looking at whole texts, and are they actually reading for meaning in the way that we've discussed in this presentation? And if not, that's going to lead one to draw different conclusions about what's happening with the reading process.
We've got a great question here. You don't mention phonics here. In my 25 years of teaching phonics, all the students I have taught to read first learn the phonics and then read the way you say. All good readers do not read all the words, and once they can read fluently, then they will read as you say. But you are only using students who could always read phonetically. You're not discounting phonics, are you?
Well, that's a complicated question. And so certainly, I don't want to dismiss any of that hard work that's been done by that teacher. And I'm sure this person is a great teacher. There are a couple of things that I would call our attention to in response to that. And one of the things that we're looking at where I work is how severely and profoundly deaf readers learn to read, who aren't being taught phonics. And also, how do readers learn to read who haven't been taught phonics? Because there are readers who do learn to read who have been taught without the benefit of being taught direct phonics, and yet they formulate these letter sound correspondences, by themselves, generally through their experiences with real texts and through their own writing. So there, while I don't want to discount what the teacher has just claimed, there are other ways in which readers learn to read that I think we need to kind of put into the mix and talk about. How does reading actually happen? Because I think there are a variety of roads to reading. I think Yetta Goodman wrote about that in the 1980s, multiple roads to literacy. So it's a very interesting question, and I think there's, we could spend a few evenings on this topic.
Beth just said that Stephen is here and can answer that question. So I've let her talk. So Beth, if you want to put Steve on the line there.
Okay, he's on. He's here.
All right. And I don't know. Go ahead, Stephen, introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. I'm Steve Strauss, and I'm Beth Saltwerger's husband. And I almost made a miscue and said I'm her wife, but okay, it doesn't matter. So the question I understand that you're discussing is whether fMRI has been combined with eye movement studies, and why, and what did it show? That's something along those lines. Okay, yes, there have been a number of studies that combine functional MRI with eye movement. And one of the interesting things about those studies is that the authors acknowledge that the reason they're adding eye movement studies is because the functional MRI studies are limited in what they can do. They acknowledge that functional MRI has not been able to study adequately natural language that is not contrived for the purpose of testing, doing experiments, giving people letters and seeing what the sounds are. And part of that, part of what they are, what the authors of these articles acknowledge is that if the passages get too long, in other words, if we're dealing with text, then the fMRI is not able to study that for a variety of MRI-based reasons. But you can look at later portions of a text with the, by looking at what the eyes are doing. So they can, for example, identify a word later in a passage that is given to the subject and see if through the eye movement studies, the reader is fixating on a certain word. And then they can see from that if the word, if at that point parts of the brain that are used in turning letters into sounds are activated, if the word is identified based on other criteria. So yes, those studies have been done. They're done with the recognition that there are limitations to functional MRI work, that functional MRI is limited in how much it can approach natural language, but they are also very limited in their understanding, in my opinion, of what natural language is. They think natural language is big texts. The flaw in fMRI is you can study very small, you can study words, maybe short phrases. Once you get to bigger and bigger chunks of language, you can't study it because the resolution ability, temporal and spatial resolution of the functional MRI will not allow it. Well, basically that, okay, so just to finish, they don't understand that a text is language that's used in context. Natural means it's in a context. So a text doesn't have to be a large paragraph. It doesn't have to be a short paragraph. It could be one word if it's in a context. A stop sign is a text because it's in a context. They don't get that point. They are spinning their wheels when they try to get at naturalistic language by thinking that you simply have to add more and more words and see if we can study it with the fMRI. And if we can, we are now studying natural language. That's my take on it.
All right, incredible.
Okay.
We've imposed on these lovely people long enough, I think. If you would send me your questions, I'd be happy to pass them along. But I can't tell you how much I appreciate the three of you putting together this presentation. As I said, I'm kind of a reading nerd, but I find this stuff just absolutely fascinating. So you didn't come here to hear me. I'll just say thank you very much. And people, if you have questions or anything, I will put my email in the chat room so you can send me any questions. I'll have a recording of this out tomorrow. And Peter Duckett, can I send people that video that we tried to get up?
Yeah, actually, they can go to my website. It's pduckett.net.
Okay.
And I would have played it on my own computer, but the issue is that my computer had something reformatted and I can't even access it myself. So yeah.
Okay. All right. So look for that recording and we will see people at the next ILEC event. And thank you, wonderful presenters.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Mhm.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.
And everyone, if you're registered for this event, I will send you a recording. So I will send it to you all, but you have my email there. So I will be zipping this up to my YouTube in just a minute. So I'll go so I can do that now. So thank you. We'll see you at the next event.